also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. Happy you could join me, and I'm going to take a little bit deeper dive, a little more serious dive into a question that has been my mind since we started to see the results come together. Most of the results are in from the midterm elections. The black pill that I feel like was administered to me this time around was, how can it be that in a nation where, and I'm using broad terms here, but 75% of people, depending on the poll, would agree, you know what, things are expensive, things are harder, gas is more expensive, our money buys less, groceries are more expensive, they don't like the direction the country is going. If there really was, 3/4 of the country saying, wow, this is not good, the president's approval ratings are in the toilet, many politicians who stood for lockdowns and who enforced lockdowns, shut down businesses, destroyed livelihoods, imprisoned people, or had them ticketed or prosecuted for doing something as simple as trying to go to see a loved one. Why were they reelected? Why were the incumbents able to hold on to their seats in the face of some of the wrongs that were done over the last couple of years? Now, you might be tempted to say, well, Brian, there was really nothing wrong done. You're going to have to peddle that to somebody else. See, I'm wondering why freedom was not a higher priority. Now, clearly it was in some races and for some people. But, the red wave that some had hoped for didn't really come across. And frankly, even if it had, there's no guarantee that the Republicans, speaking broadly, would have ever delivered on it. They don't have a good track record of doing this. I'm more curious about what has happened to the American public, and in particular, what has happened to its understanding of freedom. Now, the first thing we need to understand is freedom is not something that just, magically appears, or it's just there and you can access it whenever you want. It's actually a very rare thing when you look at human history. I mean, it's had lots of marketing. Most people would agree that, yes, freedom is a good thing. Even the people with a controlling nature would say something, well, yes, you should be free, free to do as you're told. But I love the way that Dr. Harold Peace puts it. He says, freedom can be likened to a butterfly landing for a time, here and there for a season, as it passes through the centuries. And it has only been the most cautious and perceptive peoples who permitted it to remain with them long. Hence, their greatness. I know we take it for granted. We think, well, of course, I'm an American. It's going to be my birthright here. But it's very clear from this election that for most people, for most voters, it's just not the priority that it once was. Now, I can't deny abortion was definitely an issue that took Generation Z to the polls. And so now the politicians are struggling with, well, how do we balance, those who want freedom, and they're pretty driven as well. How do we balance them with the people who want abortion? Well, the Simpsons took a stab at this about 26 years ago. Here was their take.
Abortions for all. Very well. No abortions for anyone. Abortions for some, miniature American flags for others.
So that was probably the best take I've seen in a while. That was Bob Dole running against Bill Clinton, and how do we keep the masses happy? Whatever is being done, though, it seems to be working. Either that or we are in the midst of the biggest case of Stockholm syndrome that the world has ever seen. But it makes me wonder, is it just that people don't understand what freedom is? And I don't mean you have to be a rabid flag waver and you've got to be, shooting off fireworks, anytime it gets within 10 minutes of the 4th of July. I'm just saying, do you really understand why government exists? Because the purpose for which our government was called into existence was to support freedom. I'm going to recommend a couple of essays. And if you're freedom curious, you will love them. If you're freedom averse, well, you're going to react like a vampire would to a basket full of garlic cloves or a basin of holy water. You won't like it. But one of the best essays that you can read is a very simple essay by Frederick Bastiat, who lived in the early 1800s, a Frenchman, a French economist who wrote The Law. He describes the purpose of the law, the reason that we create government in the first place, this way. He says its mission is to prevent the rights of one from interfering with those of another in any of these things. That's, in other words, the pursuit of life, liberty, happiness, property. Law, he says, because it has force for its necessary sanction, can only have the domain of force, which is justice. So let me put that in in even plainer language, just so I can understand. It's not that you need it dumbed down. The reason for the law is so that justice can prevail. When someone is harmed, when someone is injured, where there's an actual victim, the law is what holds accountable the person who caused the damage and does its best to make whole the person who's been harmed. But unfortunately, in the hands of politicians, the law becomes an instrument of plunder or an instrument of control. And that is what we are seeing right now, writ large, at every level of government, and not just in the United States. This is happening worldwide. Now, there was another guy by the name of Auberon Herbert who wrote a book called The Right and Wrong of Compulsion by the State. Now, where Bastiat took a more utilitarian approach to why do we have laws, what's the reason for our system of laws, Auberon Herbert took much more of a moral basis for why we have the laws. In fact, this is his take. He says, how can an act done under compulsion have any moral element in it, seeing that what is moral is the free act of an intelligent being? In fact, he takes it a step further. The ruling idea of the politician, stated rather bluntly, is that those who are opposed to him exist for the purpose of being made to serve his ends. In other words, being forced to serve his ends, if he can get power enough in his hands to force these ends upon him. In a nutshell, that's what politics looks like today. And I get it. Not everybody understands freedom. Not everybody cherishes it. In fact, I think it's safe to say a lot of us are trained to fear it from a very early age. Well, freedom, that's kind of a scary thing. We want to know who's in charge. And this is actually one of the thoughts that I heard in relation to the outcome of Tuesday's election. Really, nothing much changed. It wasn't like, oh, the left got this huge advantage. It wasn't like the right got a huge advantage. We just saw Leviathan just keep chugging along as it has been. But nothing changed at all. And a lot of this comes down to the understanding that maybe people kind of like the idea of being told what to do. Maybe freedom is scary because it involves the unknown. I mean, yeah, you may be living under some degree of oppression, but hey, at least you know what that oppression is. And so, it's better to go with what you know than the fear of something that you can't see clearly. Now, it puts us into a situation where we're faced with a false dilemma. And the dilemma goes something like this. We're told that we must choose between freedom and safety. This was, after all, the justification for so many of the COVID policies and mandates that were forced upon us. Well, we have to give up some of those freedoms in order to keep everybody safe. In other words, we were told we must sacrifice freedom for the greater good. But that's a false dilemma. It's not like it's this choice or it's that choice. You're not limited to those two choices. Why? Because freedom is the greater good. And again, it comes down to the idea of who has the best knowledge, the best incentive to make decisions concerning what is right for you and yours, those you're responsible for. It's you. It's not someone else. And, with the lockdowns, people found that, well, I have no responsibility. They told me stay home, so I'm going to sit home and watch Netflix all day. They sent me money, right? The stimulus checks to make sure that I have a little bit of spending change. I finally got that nice big screen TV. No responsibility. I can't work. My job's non-essential. I think for some people that was actually more comfortable than trying to exert their freedom and make their way in a world where, yes, there was uncertainty because of a virus. We didn't know for sure where it was going, but they didn't want to take that responsibility. I'm not sure how we get that back. People who are freedom averse, or people who, for that matter, just love to control others, that's not a message they want to hear. But my message is for those who are freedom curious, or for that matter, very committed to freedom. Consider those two essays, The Law by Frederick Bastiat and The Right and Wrong of Compulsion by the State by Auberon Herbert. They will give you ample supplies of intellectual ammunition and help you better understand why freedom is the higher good. And I would also add, please support the organizations and the individuals that are actually striving to support your freedom. It's popular right now to malign them, but there will come a day where we will recognize they were doing the right thing. No matter how hated they were, no matter how much they were smeared, they were trying to do the right thing, not just for themselves, but for everybody. Why? Because they understood that freedom matters. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see.
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.